The morning light of three suns poured through the tall windows of the Galactic Academy. The building was old, older than most species in the galaxy could remember. Its walls were made of white stone that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Inside, hundreds of young aliens from different worlds walked through the halls, talking and laughing as they moved to their classes. In room 47B, Professor Vola stood at the front of a large classroom. She was a Taurian, a species known for their tall, thin bodies and silver skin. Her 4 eyes blinked slowly as she looked at her students. There were about 60 of them today, all sitting in curved rows that rose up like steps. They came from 12 different worlds, each one different from the others. Today, Professor Vola said, her voice calm and clear, we will study one of the most famous battles in galactic history, the Siege of Keth Prime. A few students shifted in their seats. Some had heard stories about this battle. Others knew nothing at all. A young Rillan male named Wu leaned back in his chair and crossed his 4 arms. He had blue scales covering his body and 2 small horns on his head. He did not look very interested. Near the front of the room sat a Taurian female named Hana. She was younger than the professor, still a student, but her eyes were bright with curiosity. She had heard her grandmother speak of Keth Prime when she was a child, but the old woman had never explained what really happened there. Professor Vola touched a small device on her desk. The lights in the room dimmed, and a large hologram appeared in the air above the students. It showed a planet covered in red dust and sharp mountains. A narrow passage cut through the mountains like a wound in the earth. Keth Prime, the professor said. A small planet on the edge of the Draven Empire. 62 years ago, this planet was home to a human colony. 3,000 humans lived there, most of them farmers and miners. They had no army. They had no weapons except for simple tools. They were peaceful people who wanted nothing more than to live quiet lives. The hologram changed. Now it showed thousands of Draven warriors marching across the red dust. The Draven were large creatures with thick gray skin and teeth like knives. They carried energy weapons and wore armor made of black metal. There were so many of them that they looked like a dark river flowing across the land. The Draven Empire decided they wanted Keth Prime for themselves, Professor Vola continued. They sent 40,000 warriors to take the planet. The humans had nowhere to run. Their ships were too slow to escape. They sent messages asking for help, but the nearest fleet was 9 days away. Hana leaned forward in her seat. She could feel her heart beating faster. 9 days. How could anyone survive for 9 days against 40,000 warriors? The humans knew they could not win, the professor said. They knew that most of them would die. But they also knew something else. They knew that if they could hold the enemy back for 9 days, help would arrive. Their families, their children, their old and their sick, could escape through the northern mountains while the warriors held the passage. The hologram changed again. Now it showed a group of humans standing at the entrance to the narrow passage. There were only 300 of them. They wore simple armor and carried old weapons. Some of them were soldiers, but most were farmers and workers who had never fought before. They looked small and weak compared to the Draven army approaching them. 300 humans, Professor Vola said softly. 300 against 40,000. They called themselves the Keth Defenders. They stood at the passage and refused to move. Wu made a small sound of disbelief. That is impossible, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. No species could survive those numbers. This must be exaggerated. Professor Vola looked at him. Her 4 eyes showed no anger, only patience. Many people have said the same thing, young Wu, but the records are clear. The evidence is solid. The siege of Keth Prime lasted exactly 9 days. When help finally arrived, 40,000 Draven warriors lay dead in the passage. The civilians had escaped through the mountains. The human fleet destroyed the remaining Draven ships in orbit. And the 300? Hana asked quietly. The professor paused. The room was very silent. 18 survived, she said. 282 gave their lives to protect their people. They fought without sleep. They fought through wounds that should have killed them. When their weapons broke, they fought with their hands. When they could no longer stand, they crawled. They did not stop. They did not surrender. For 9 days and 9 nights they held the gate. The hologram showed images now, old recordings from the battle. Humans standing shoulder to shoulder in the narrow passage, their faces covered in blood and dust. Bodies of Draven warriors piled so high that new attackers had to climb over them. A human man with one arm missing, still swinging his broken weapon at the enemy. A woman holding a doorway alone, while her friends pulled back injured fighters to safety. Hannah felt tears in her eyes. She had never seen anything like this. She had never imagined that any species could do such things. "How?" she asked, her voice shaking. "How did they do it?" Professor Vola turned off the hologram. The lights came back on, but the room still felt dark somehow. "That is the question that historians have asked for 62 years, she said. "The humans were not stronger than the Draven. They were not faster or smarter. Their weapons were worse. Their armor was weaker. By every measure, they should have fallen in the first hour. But they did not." She walked slowly across the front of the room, her long fingers touching the edge of her desk. Some say it was luck. Some say the Draven made mistakes. Some say the passage was so narrow that numbers did not matter. She stopped and looked at her students. "But I have studied this battle for 30 years. I have read every report and watched every recording, and I believe the answer is simpler than all of that." "What is it?" Wu asked. Despite his earlier doubt, he was listening now. "Humans do not know when to stop," the professor said. "Other species feel pain and pull back. They feel fear and run away. They see death coming and they accept it. But humans are different. Something in their minds, something in their bodies, refuses to quit. They will keep fighting long after any reasonable creature would have given up. They will die standing rather than live on their knees." She paused and looked out the window at the 3 suns. "That is what makes them dangerous," she said quietly. "And that is what makes them heroes." Outside the classroom, in the hallway, an old man pushed a cleaning cart slowly past the door. He was human, with gray hair and wrinkled skin. His name was Tay, and he had worked as a janitor at the academy for 23 years. He wore simple gray clothes and carried a mop over his shoulder. He stopped when he heard the professor's words. His hands, rough and scarred, tightened on the handle of his cart. For a moment he stood very still, his eyes looking at something far away. Then he shook his head and continued walking. He had floors to clean. He had work to do. The past was the past, and there was no point in remembering it. But as he walked away, his right hand moved to touch his left arm, just above the elbow. Under his sleeve, hidden from everyone, there was an old scar. A mark burned into his skin long ago. A mark that only a few people in the galaxy would recognize. The mark of the Keth Defenders. The class continued for another hour. Professor Vola showed more images and played more recordings. She explained the tactics the humans had used. She talked about how they had built walls from the bodies of their enemies. She described how they had taken turns sleeping for only minutes at a time while others held the line. Through it all, Wu sat in his chair with doubt on his face. He was a good student, one of the best in his class. His people, the Rillan, were known for their sharp minds and their love of facts. They did not believe in legends. They believed in numbers and logic. "Professor," he said during a pause in the lecture, "I must ask a question." "Of course," Vola replied. Wu stood up from his seat. His 4 arms moved as he spoke, a habit of his species when they were thinking hard. "Everything you have shown us comes from human records," he said. human recordings, human reports. But we all know that humans are famous for making their history sound better than it really was. How do we know these stories are true? How do we know 300 humans actually killed 40,000 Draven warriors? Some students nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Hana turned in her seat to look at Wu with anger in her eyes. "Are you saying the humans lied?" she asked. "I am saying that all species tell stories about themselves," Wu replied calmly. "Stories that make them look brave and strong. The Draven were powerful warriors. They had better weapons and more soldiers. It does not make sense that they would lose so badly to such a small group." Professor Vola held up a hand before Hana could respond. "Your question is fair, Wu," she said. "Historians have asked the same thing many times, but I must tell you that the evidence is not just from humans. The Draven themselves recorded this battle. Their own generals wrote reports about what happened, and those reports match the human stories exactly." She touched her device again. A new document appeared in the air, written in the sharp, angular letters of the Draven language. "This is from General Thak, the commander of the Draven forces," she said. "He wrote this message to his superiors on the 5th day of the siege." The translator in the room converted the Draven words to common galactic speech. A deep voice read the message aloud. "We have lost 12,000 warriors to these humans. I do not understand how this is possible. They do not sleep. They do not eat. They do not stop. When we cut them down, they get back up. When we break their weapons, they use their hands. I have fought against many species in my life, but I have never seen anything like this. I am beginning to believe that these creatures are not natural. They are something else, something that should not exist." The room was very quiet when the message ended. "General Thak was killed on the 8th day, Professor Vola said. "He died in the passage, fighting against the humans himself. His body was never recovered. The Draven believe his warriors buried him under the bodies of his enemies as a sign of honor." Wu sat down slowly. His doubt was still there, but it was smaller now. He did not know what to say. Outside in the hallway, Tay had stopped again. He stood near the door with his cleaning cart, pretending to fix something on its wheels. But really, he was listening. His old ears were still sharp, and he could hear every word from inside the classroom. When General Thak's message was read aloud, Tay closed his eyes. He remembered Thak. He remembered the general's face, twisted with rage, as he had charged into the passage himself. He remembered the moment when Thak had fallen, his massive body crashing to the ground like a great tree cut down by lightning. Tay remembered being the one to cut him down. His hands began to shake. He grabbed the handle of his cart to steady himself. After all these years, the memories were still there. They never went away. They came at night when he tried to sleep. They came in the morning when he looked in the mirror. They came whenever someone spoke the words, Keth Prime. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He was just an old janitor now. That was all. He pushed his cart forward and entered the classroom. No one paid attention to him. Why would they? He was just a human worker, old and gray, doing his job. He moved to the corner of the room and began to mop the floor near the windows. His movements were slow and careful, like a man who had learned patience through long years of practice. Hana glanced at him once, then turned back to the professor. Wu did not look at him at all. To them, he was invisible, just another part of the background like the chairs and the walls. "Let us talk about the end of the siege," Professor Vola said. "On the 9th day, human warships arrived in orbit around Keth Prime. They destroyed the Draven fleet in less than 3 hours. Then they sent soldiers down to the surface to help the defenders." She showed another image. This one was from the human rescue team. It showed the passage after the battle had ended. The ground was covered in bodies, so many that you could not see the red dust beneath them. Broken weapons and shattered armor lay everywhere like leaves after a storm. And there, at the far end of the passage, stood the survivors. 18 humans, covered in blood and dirt, barely able to stand. Some of them were holding each other up. Some were sitting on the bodies of their enemies because there was no clean ground left to sit on. "These are the survivors," Professor Vola said. 18 men and women who lived through 9 days of constant battle. They were taken to hospitals, but most of them refused treatment until they knew that the civilians were safe. Some of them had wounds that should have killed them hours before. The doctors did not understand how they were still alive. "What happened to them?" Hannah asked softly. "Some returned to normal lives. Some could not. The memories were too strong." The professor's voice was gentle. "Humans call it trauma. It is a kind of wound that you cannot see, but it hurts just as much as any other. Many of the survivors struggled for years. A few took their own lives. Others disappeared completely, changing their names and starting over in places where no one knew who they were." Tay's mop moved across the floor in slow circles. His face showed nothing. His eyes looked at the ground. But inside, his heart was beating hard. He remembered the hospital. He remembered the bright lights and the soft voices of the doctors. He remembered looking at his hands and seeing blood that was not his own. He remembered the faces of his friends, the ones who had not survived. He remembered their names, all 282 of them. He still said those names every night before he went to sleep. It was his way of keeping them alive, even though their bodies were long gone. "Professor," Wu said, his voice quieter now, "you said the humans held the gate. But there must have been moments when the line almost broke, when the defenders almost gave up. What kept them fighting?" Professor Vola smiled sadly. "That is perhaps the most important question of all, and I do not think anyone knows the full answer. The survivors rarely spoke about what happened. They gave their reports to the military and then went silent. It was as if they wanted the world to forget them." She looked out the window at the 3 suns again. "But from what we do know, they fought for each other. Not for glory, not for their government, not for rewards. They fought because their friends were standing next to them, and they could not let those friends down. They fought because behind them were children and old people and sick people who could not fight for themselves. They fought because they believed that some things are worth dying for." "And what things are those?" Hannah asked. The professor turned to look at her young student. Her 4 eyes were soft with emotion. "The people you love," she said simply. In the corner of the room, Tay stopped mopping. For just a moment, he stood perfectly still. His eyes were wet, but he did not wipe them. He just stood there, holding his mop like it was the only thing keeping him standing. Then he took a breath, and he went back to work. No one had noticed him at all. The lecture was coming to an end. Professor Vola had shown all her images and played all her recordings. The students had asked their questions and taken their notes. Now she stood at the front of the room, ready to give her final words. "The siege of Keth Prime changed the way the galaxy looked at humans," she said. "Before that battle, humans were seen as weak and unimportant. They had no great empire. They had no powerful weapons. They were farmers and traders, nothing more. But after Keth Prime, everyone understood the truth." She paused and looked at each of her students. "Humans are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest or the smartest. But they have something that others do not. They have a fire inside them that refuses to die. When everything seems lost, when hope is gone, when any reasonable creature would accept defeat, humans find a way to keep going. That is their gift. That is their curse. And that is why the galaxy learned to respect them." Wu raised his hand again. His earlier doubt was mostly gone now, but something still bothered him. "Professor, I understand what you are saying. but I still find it hard to believe that 300 humans could kill 40,000 Draven warriors. Even in a narrow passage, the numbers are too extreme. There must be something we are missing. Before the professor could answer, a voice came from the corner of the room. It was not 40,000. Everyone turned to look. The old janitor stood there with his mop in his hands. His gray hair was messy, and his simple clothes were worn. He looked like nothing special at all, just an old man who cleaned floors for a living. "Excuse me?" Wu said, his voice showing surprise and a little annoyance. Tay looked at the young Rylan with steady eyes. For a moment, he seemed much taller than he really was, much stronger, much older. "It was not 40,000, he said again. "It was closer to 43,000. The official records are wrong. They only counted the bodies that could be identified. Many of the Draven were crushed beneath the others. Many more were burned when we set fire to the passage on the third night." The room became very quiet. Professor Vola took a step forward, her 4 eyes wide with shock. "How could you possibly know that?" she asked. Tay did not answer right away. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work. Then he looked at the hologram that still floated in the air, showing the faces of the 18 survivors. "Because I was there," he said softly. "I guarded the northern gate." No one moved. No one spoke. The students looked at each other with confusion and disbelief. Surely this old janitor was lying. Surely he was just an old man who wanted attention. But Hannah looked at his face, and she saw something there. Something real. Something painful. She had seen that same look on her grandmother's face when the old woman spoke about the war she had lived through. It was the look of someone who had seen things that could never be unseen. "That is impossible," Wu said loudly. "The survivors of Keth Prime are famous throughout the galaxy. We know their names. We know their faces. If you were one of them, we would recognize you." Tay smiled sadly. It was a small smile, filled with years of hidden pain. "The military gave us new identities after the battle," he said. "They said it was for our protection. Some people wanted to hurt us because of what we had done. Others wanted to worship us like heroes. Neither felt right. We just wanted to be left alone." He slowly reached for the sleeve of his left arm. His hands were shaking now, but he did not try to hide it. With careful movements, he rolled the sleeve up past his elbow. There, on his skin, was a mark. It was old and faded, but still clearly visible. It showed a gate surrounded by fire, with 3 stars above it. Below the gate were words in the human language that said, "Hold until dawn." Professor Vola gasped. She walked quickly across the room until she stood in front of Tay. Her eyes looked at the mark with wonder and disbelief. "This is the brand of the Keth Defenders," she whispered. "Every survivor received this mark on the day they were rescued. It was burned into their skin as a symbol of what they had done." "It hurt," Tay said quietly. "But not as much as other things." The students began to talk among themselves. Some were excited. Some were scared. Some still did not believe what they were seeing. Wu stood up from his seat and walked down to the front of the room. He looked at the mark on Tay's arm with his own eyes. "This could be fake," he said, but his voice was uncertain now. "Anyone could make a mark like this." "They could," Tay agreed, "but they would not know what it felt like to earn it." He looked at the young Rylan with eyes that had seen too much death and too much pain. "You asked how we survived," he said. "You asked what kept us fighting. The professor gave you the true answer. We fought for each other. We fought for the people we loved. But there is something else she did not say." "What is that?" Hannah asked. She had come down from her seat too, standing close to the old man. "We were scared," Tay said. "Every moment of every day we were terrified. We did not feel brave. We did not feel like heroes. We felt like children lost in a nightmare, waiting to wake up, but waking up meant dying, and dying meant leaving our friends alone. So we stayed awake. We stayed in the nightmare. We held the gate because there was no one else to hold it. His voice broke slightly, and he had to stop for a moment. When he continued, his words were barely louder than a whisper. I watched my best friend die on the 4th day. His name was June. He was 23 years old. He had just gotten married 2 months before the invasion. His wife was pregnant with their first child. He died holding the line while I pulled wounded soldiers to safety. Tears were rolling down Tay's wrinkled face now, but he did not wipe them away. I watched my commander die on the 7th day. His name was Sung. He was the bravest man I ever knew. When the Draven broke through the first wall, he stood alone in the gap and fought them back with nothing but a broken sword. He killed 37 of them before he fell. I counted. I always count. The room was completely silent. Even the machines seemed to have stopped humming. I watched boys become men in those 9 days, Tay continued. I watched men become legends. And I watched legends die one by one until only 18 of us were left standing when the ships finally came. Professor Vola put her hand gently on Tay's arm. Her touch was light, like she was afraid he might break. Why did you never tell anyone? She asked softly. Why did you hide yourself here, working as a janitor? Tay looked at her with tired eyes. Because I did not want to be remembered for the people I killed, he said. I wanted to be remembered for the floors I cleaned, the messes I fixed, the small, quiet work that keeps the world running. After so much death, I just wanted to do something that helped people live. He rolled his sleeve back down, covering the mark once again. I have heard your lecture many times over the years, Professor. You always tell the story well, but you always miss one thing. What is that? She asked. You make it sound like we were special, Tay said. Like we were different from other humans, but we were not. We were farmers and miners and workers. We were ordinary people who found ourselves in an impossible situation, and we did what humans have always done. What is that? Hana asked. Tay looked at her young face, so full of curiosity and hope, and he gave her a small, sad smile. We refused to give up. The students gathered around Tay like children around a fire on a cold night. They wanted to hear more. They needed to hear more. This was not a story from a textbook anymore. This was real. This was standing right in front of them, wearing the clothes of a janitor and carrying the weight of 62 years of silence. Professor Vola canceled the rest of her lecture. She told the other professors that something important was happening in room 47B. Word spread quickly through the academy, and soon other teachers were standing at the back of the room, listening with the same wonder as their students. Tell us about the first day, Hana said gently. What was it like when the Draven came? Tay set down his mop and leaned against the wall. His body was tired, but his mind was somewhere else, somewhere far away and long ago. I was working in the mines when the alarms went off, he said. We all thought it was a drill at first. We had drills every few months. But then we heard the explosions. The sky turned red with fire. Ships were falling from the clouds like broken birds. He closed his eyes, and he could see it all again. The smoke rising from the colony buildings, the screams of people running through the streets, the sound of Draven ships landing in the fields where he had worked just that morning. By the time I reached the town, the army was already organizing. If you can call it an army. We had maybe 50 real soldiers. The rest of us were just people with guns and fear. The commander, Sung, stood on a broken wall and told us the truth. He did not lie. He said the enemy was coming with 40,000 warriors. He said help was 9 days away. He said most of us would probably die. Were you scared? Wu asked. His earlier doubt was completely gone now. He looked at Tay with respect in his eyes. I was terrified, Tay admitted. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my weapon. I remember looking at the people around me. Farmers I had known my whole life, workers who had shared meals with me, friends who had laughed with me and complained about the heat with me, and I thought, these are the people I am going to die with. He opened his eyes and looked at the young Rillan. But then something strange happened. Sung asked who would stay and fight. He said anyone who wanted to leave could go. No one would think less of them. There was no shame in running from certain death, and I watched every single person step forward. Every one. Old men with bad backs, young boys who had never held a weapon before, women who had children waiting for them in the mountains. They all stayed. Why? Hana whispered. Because we realized something, Tay said. If we ran, the Draven would catch us. They would kill us anyway, but they would kill our families first. They would make us watch. That was their way. But if we stood at the passage, if we held the gate, we could give our families time to escape. We could give them a chance. And that chance was worth dying for. He pushed himself off the wall and walked slowly to the window. The three suns were lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The first wave came at sunset on the first day. There were thousands of them. The ground shook with their footsteps. They were so confident. They thought they would walk right over us and be done before morning. But we surprised them. A small smile crossed his face. It was the smile of a man remembering something that should not be possible. The passage was narrow, only about 30 meters wide. We had built walls across it during the day, using stones and metal and anything else we could find. The Draven could not use their numbers against us. They had to come at us in small groups, and we cut them down. But they kept coming, Professor Vola said softly. They kept coming, Tay agreed. Hour after hour, day after day. They never stopped. When their warriors fell, others climbed over the bodies. When the bodies piled too high, they built ramps from the dead. We would kill 100, and 100 more would take their place. He turned away from the window and looked at the students. By the third day, we were standing on mountains of corpses. The smell was so bad that some of us could not stop throwing up. The blood was so deep that it came up to our ankles. And still they came, and still we fought. How did you sleep? One of the professors at the back asked. We did not, Tay said. Not really. We would take turns closing our eyes for a few minutes at a time. Someone would shake us awake when our turn came to fight again. I do not think any of us slept more than 2 hours in 9 days. By the end, we were seeing things that were not there. Shadows moving in the corners, voices calling our names. Our minds were breaking, but our bodies kept fighting. He looked at his hands again. I killed my first Draven warrior with a farming tool, a simple shovel that I had used to dig gardens. By the 9th day, I had lost count of how many I had killed. Hundreds, maybe 1,000. I do not know. It stopped feeling real after a while. It was just motion, swing, block, stab, repeat, over and over, until there was nothing left in my mind except the need to keep moving. Hana had tears streaming down her face. She did not try to hide them. What about June? She asked. Your friend who died on the 4th day. What happened to him? Tay's face changed. The distant look in his eyes became something sharper, something more painful. June was holding a section of wall near the northern gate. That was my section too. We had grown up together, worked in the mines together. He was like a brother to me. When the Draven broke through on the 4th morning, he pushed me out of the way and took the blow that was meant for me. His voice cracked, but he kept talking. I caught him as he fell. There was so much blood. He looked at me and smiled. Can you believe that? He smiled at me, and he said, "Tell my wife I love her. Tell my child I tried to be brave." Then he was gone. The room was so quiet that you could hear the hum of the lights above. I found out later that his wife did not survive either, Tay said softly. She was killed in an accident during the evacuation. She never knew that June had died protecting me. Their child was never born. Everything June fought for, everything he died for, was already lost before the battle even ended. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. That is the truth about war. It takes everything from you. Not just your body, but your soul, your hope, your ability to see good in the world. After Keth Prime, I could not look at a sunset without remembering the fire. I could not hear laughter without remembering the screams. Every beautiful thing was stained with blood. Professor Vola stepped closer to him. "How did you survive?" she asked. "Not the battle, after. How did you keep living?" Tay was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tired but steady. "For many years, I did not want to. The guilt was too heavy. Why did I survive when better people died? Why was I still breathing when June was not? I thought about ending it many times. Some of the other survivors did. They could not carry the weight anymore." He looked at Hana. "But then I remembered something Sung said on the second night. We were exhausted and hopeless. Many of us wanted to give up. And Sung stood in front of us and said, 'If you die here, die with purpose. But if you live, live with purpose too. The dead cannot help anyone. Only the living can make the sacrifice mean something.'" He straightened his back slightly. "So I decided to live with purpose. Not a big purpose. Not saving the galaxy or fighting more wars. Just a small purpose. Cleaning floors. Fixing broken things. Making sure the places where young people learn are safe and comfortable. It is not heroic. It is not famous. But it is honest work that helps others. And that is enough for me." The students looked at him with new eyes. This old man in simple clothes, with his mop and his cleaning cart, was more of a hero than anyone they had ever met. "The 18 of us made a promise," Tay said. "We promised that we would never seek glory for what we had done. We would live quiet lives and let the dead have the fame. They earned it more than we did. They gave everything. We were just lucky enough to still be breathing when the ships came." He picked up his mop again. "I have broken that promise today. I do not know why. Maybe because I am old and my time is running short. Maybe because I heard your questions and felt the need to answer them. Or maybe because I am tired of hiding. 62 years is a long time to carry a secret." He began walking toward the door. "Wait," Hana called out. "Please, do not go yet." Tay stopped, but did not turn around. "What else do you want to know?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "I want to know everything." Tay turned around slowly. He looked at Hana, at the other students, at the professors who had gathered to listen. There were more people in the room now than when the lecture had started. Word had spread through the academy like fire, and aliens from dozens of species had come to see the living legend who had hidden among them for so long. "Everything is too much," Tay said with a small smile. "Even I do not remember everything." "The mind has a way of forgetting the worst parts. It is how we survive." But he walked back to the center of the room anyway. He sat down in an empty chair, and the students gathered around him on the floor like they were children listening to their grandfather's stories. Even Wu sat close, his earlier doubt replaced by something like wonder. "The last day was the hardest," Tay began. "We knew help was coming. We could see the human ships entering orbit, but the Draven knew it too. They threw everything they had at us, not just soldiers anymore, but war machines and bombs and weapons I had never seen before." He rubbed his left arm, where the hidden mark lay beneath his sleeve. By that point, there were only 24 of us left, 24 out of 300. We were so tired we could barely stand. Our weapons were broken or out of power. Some of us were fighting with rocks and pieces of metal. One woman, her name was Mi, was fighting with her bare hands. She had lost her weapon 2 days before and refused to stop. "What happened to her?" someone asked. "She survived," Tay said. "She was one of the 18. Last I heard, she became a teacher on a colony world. She said she wanted to build things instead of destroying them. I understood that feeling." He looked up at the ceiling, remembering. The Draven made their final push just before noon on the 9th day. They came all at once, thousands of them, screaming and charging through the passage. We could see their general, a new one after Thak fell, leading them from the front. He was huge, even for a Draven. He carried a weapon that crackled with energy. "Were you scared?" Hana asked. "I was beyond scared," Tay admitted. "I was empty. There was nothing left inside me except the need to keep my promise." "Hold until dawn," our mark said. But dawn had come and gone. Help was in the sky. We just had to hold a little longer. He closed his eyes. Sung was the first to fall that morning. He had been wounded dozens of times over the 9 days, but he never stopped fighting. When the Draven general broke through our line, Sung was the one who stood in his way. They fought for maybe 30 seconds. It felt like hours, and then the general's weapon struck Sung in the chest. A tear rolled down Tay's cheek. "I was standing 10 meters away. I saw Sung fall. I saw the light leave his eyes, and something inside me snapped. I do not remember what happened next. The others told me later. They said I picked up Sung's broken sword and charged at the general. They said I screamed a word that was not a word, just pure sound. They said I fought like a demon." He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. "When I came back to myself, the general was dead at my feet. I was covered in his blood. My hands were so badly hurt I could not feel them anymore. And the human ships were landing behind us, soldiers pouring out to help. It was over. It was finally over." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Wu spoke. "You killed their general," he said. "You ended the battle." Tay shook his head. "The battle ended because help arrived. I just happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. Any of us would have done the same. We all did the same. Over and over, for 9 days. That is what the stories never understand. There was no single hero. There were 300 heroes. Most of them just did not survive long enough to be remembered." He stood up slowly, his old bones creaking with the effort. "I have told you everything I can remember. I hope it helps you understand what really happened. Not the legend, not the myth, just the truth. A group of ordinary people did an impossible thing because they had no other choice. They were not brave. They were not special. They were just humans, doing what humans do when their backs are against the wall." Hana stood up too. She walked over to Tai and stood in front of him. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. "Sir," she said, "I have one more question." "Yes?" "Why did you become a janitor? Of all the things you could have done, all the places you could have gone, why here? Why this?" Tay smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the sad ghost of one he had shown before. "Because someone has to clean up the messes," he said. "During the war, I made messes. I created destruction and death. I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing the opposite, cleaning, fixing, making things better in small ways that no one notices." He picked up his mop and held it like a soldier might hold a weapon. "And there is something else. After everything I saw, after everything I did, I wanted to be around young people. People like you. People who are learning and growing and becoming something new. When I see students walking through these halls talking about their futures, I remember why we fought. Not for glory, not for revenge. For this. For the chance to have ordinary, boring lives. For the chance to argue about homework and worry about exams and dream about tomorrow. That is what we were protecting. That is what June died for. That is what Sung died for." He looked around the room at all the young faces staring at him. "Every time I clean a floor or fix a broken light, I am honoring them. Every time I see a student graduate and walk out of these doors to start their life, I know our sacrifice meant something. That is worth more to me than any medal or monument. That is my peace." Professor Vola stepped forward. She straightened her back and placed her right hand over her heart in the Taurian gesture of deepest respect. "On behalf of this academy and everyone in it," she said, "I thank you for your service. I thank you for your sacrifice. And I thank you for sharing your story with us today." One by one, the students stood. They did not know the Taurian gesture, so they did what felt right. Hana placed her hand over her heart. Wu lowered his head in a bow. Others raised their hands in salutes from their own cultures. Soon the entire room was standing, honoring the old janitor who had hidden among them for so long. Tay looked at them all with tears in his eyes. For 62 years he had carried his secret alone. For 62 years he had hidden from the world, afraid of what people would think, afraid of the memories, afraid of becoming a symbol instead of a person. But now, standing in this room surrounded by young people from a dozen different worlds, he felt something he had not felt since before the siege. He felt peace. "Thank you," he said softly. "All of you. Thank you." He began walking toward the door again, pushing his cleaning cart ahead of him. But before he reached the exit, Hana called out one last time. "Sir, will you come back tomorrow? Will you tell us more?" Tay stopped. He did not turn around, but his voice carried clearly through the quiet room. "I will be here," he said. "I am always here. I have floors to clean and lights to fix. And maybe if you want I can tell you about the others. About June and Sung and me and all the rest. They deserve to be remembered too." Then he pushed his cart through the door and disappeared into the hallway. The room remained silent for a long time after he left. The students did not know what to say. They had come to learn about history, and they had found a living piece of it cleaning their classrooms. Finally, Professor Vola spoke. "Class is dismissed," she said quietly. "I think we all need time to think about what we have heard today." As the students filed out, Hana walked to the window and looked out at the 3 suns setting in the sky. Somewhere below, she knew, an old man was pushing a cart through the halls, cleaning up the messes of the universe one floor at a time. And in that moment, she understood something important. Heroes do not always wear medals or carry weapons. Sometimes they carry mops. Sometimes they clean floors. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, asking for nothing, wanting nothing, just quietly making the world a little bit better every day. That was the real lesson of Keth Prime. Not how to fight, not how to kill, but how to live after the fighting was done. She wiped her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow, she would find the old janitor and ask him to tell her about his friends. She would learn their names and their stories. She would make sure they were never forgotten. It was the least she could do for the people who had given everything so that she could stand here today, safe and free, looking at a peaceful sky.